This movie is about workbook properties. We'll start by describing what the properties are and show you where they are. We'll turn an option on that allows us to display the properties above the worksheet. We'll look at some of the fields and how to enter some information into the fields. I'll show you how to use those values in a browsing dialog box and in Windows Explorer, and then we're going to remove the properties from the workbook. So I've got a workbook open, Book 1, and we're going to take a look at the properties that are set up for this workbook by pressing Alt-F, going to the File tab, the Backstage area. And these are the properties. Some of these properties are populated automatically. The file size, the last date modified, the date created. But the rest of the properties, and there's a few more that we can display by left-clicking Show More Properties, which works as a toggle switch. And these properties, they're field values that are descriptors for the workbook. The size, the title, tags, comments, and so on. And we can update these fields or create field values by left-clicking the field and inputting, typing in some value. I'm going to left-click off of that. Or we can do it another way. We can click this Properties drop-down, and we can left-click Show Document Panel, which is what we're going to do. And the advanced properties, by the way, we're going to do in another movie. So left-clicking Show Document Panel. So we're taken inside the workbook where we have a panel displayed above the worksheet listing some of the fields for the properties. We also have a drop-down where we can reach the advanced properties. And again, that's for another movie, for another time. We have the location of the current workbook. And we have a reminder that when we see a red asterisk, the field is required. The required fields are generally for SharePoint use. SharePoint has libraries that are set up. SharePoint uses metadata, and some of those fields that are defined, that are associated with the files or the properties, can be required. We don't currently have any required fields, so I'm going to enter some information into the subject field and in the keyword field. I've input a few words into the keyword field, and I've separated each one of those words using a semicolon. And the reason I did that will become clear in a couple of minutes. But the first thing I want to do is close the document panel by left-clicking this X. I want to save the workbook because we need to save those changes. And in order for us to utilize this functionality, I need to close the workbook. So why would we set up some values in some fields called properties in a workbook? What function does it serve? We're going to show you what function it serves by pressing Alt-F-O, which is the Open File dialog box, where we see Book 1 listed at the bottom of the list. Now we have some properties that are displayed already. These are the properties that are automatically updated, the date modified, the type of file, and the size the file is. But we can add some fields to be listed here by right-clicking on the header. And we can left-click More, and we get a lot more. And what I want to do is add the property fields that we added some values to, which was the subject. And there are a lot to choose from. There's the subject, and the other one was the tags. I'll left-click OK. And we've added the subject, which we input to be properties, and the tags. So once again, what good is that? Well, the value comes into play because you can search on the field values. But with tags, and here's why I use the semicolon, each one of the values that are put into the field become a searchable item when you separate it by a semicolon. So Level 1, Search, and Tutorial are all separately searchable fields because they're separated by a semicolon. So if you set up your files using properties, you can have all of your files in one folder, and you can find what you're looking for maybe in a quicker and more refined way than by using a fairly complex, embedded, cascading, multiple folder structure, I would argue. It's an option. I'm going to cancel out of this, and show you that you can do the same thing with Windows Explorer. We're in Windows Explorer. Once again, we see Book 1 listed. It's the same exercise. Right-click, get the list, add subject and tag, and those will be displayed, and you can do a search on the values in those property fields. Back in Book 1, looking at the properties that we set up, you may have a reason to delete all of the properties that you've set up, and you can do it in a couple of different ways. You can select the field and delete it directly, which I'm not going to do that, but you may miss some field values doing it that way, and if you have a lot of field values set up, it might be quicker to do this. Left-click Check for Issues, left-click Inspect Document. Choose the second option, Document Properties and Personal Information. Left-click Inspect, and of course we have some properties and personal information that we have field values for. Left-click Remove All, Close, and we've gotten rid of all of our field values that we put in for the properties. So we took a look at the properties in a workbook. We saw where we could update the field values for the properties back in the Backstage area, or we can have a document panel displayed above our worksheet and do it there. Once we set values up in the fields, we can add those properties to the browsing dialog boxes and to Windows Explorer and use those field values to search for our documents. We also found a quick way to remove all the field values for the properties.